Well, with the 80th anniversary this coming week of the playing of the PGA Tour Event at Colonial Country Club in Fort Worth, Texas, which is now known as the Charles Schwab Challenge, but historically was known as the Colonial National Invitational. This seems like a great time to speak with the club's leader, Frank Cordeiro, and so we welcome Frank to the program. Frank grew up in Southern California, and after serving in leadership positions at several clubs in California, he has been leading Colonial Country Club for nearly 6 years. So we talk about how he got started in the club business, his early experiences in the industry, and some of the challenges and accomplishments he has had at Colonial, where he's overseen very significant capital projects, both with respect to the golf course and the F&B operation. And we also chat about his views on best practices for successful clubs and some of the pitfalls they need to be mindful of. All at, as I said, one of the most iconic clubs in America, Colonial Country Club. So up next on this edition of Larry the Golf Guy, Frank Cordeiro, GM and COO of Colonial Country Club. Well, welcome to another edition of Larry the Golf Guy, and I am so pleased as we're on the eve of the Charles Schwab Classic coming back to Colonial, of course, as it's been for 80 years, to welcome to the podcast the COO and General Manager of Colonial, Frank Cordero. Frank, so thank you so much for making time to speak with us today. Really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, as I often like to do with folks we have on the show, just to give our listeners some context, maybe you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and whether golf or clubs at all was at all part of your life growing up.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Golf was not part of my upbringing at all. I grew up in Southern California in what many referred to as the beach cities in a little town called Artesia,
Hmm.
and was born and raised there, part of a large Portuguese community, immigrants from the islands of the Azores. So grew up in a great environment and a great community. But once again, golf was not at all a part of that. My parents were immigrants. They had an opportunity to go to school, but only up to the third grade because they had to go to work after that. And like
Hmm.
so many, they came to this country for not so much a better opportunity for them, but an opportunity for their children. So one interesting thing about my background, or something that I'm very proud of, is I am the first college graduate in our family,
Wow,
and
wonderful.
so I'm
First
sure we'll,
generation.
we'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that. But that decision to pursue higher education, and to take full advantage of the opportunity that my parents provided for me and my siblings. That decision actually is what introduced me to the club business, and it's all I've ever done since graduation. So I'm a son of Portuguese immigrants, grew up in Southern California, went to school at Cal Poly Pomona, the hospitality program there, and was again, born and raised and lived the first 45 years of my life, and started my career not too far from where I was born and where I grew up.
So let's talk about that. So maybe before we get to your post-college jobs, just at Cal Poly Pomona, where you got your degree in hospitality administration management, what attracted you to that line of study and ultimately work? What made it something you thought would be interested for you to pursue?
It's a real interesting question. It's probably not something that's unique for so many of us in terms of how we found ourselves doing what we're doing. For me, like so many, it was what I would consider a complete and total kind of accident or coincidence, if you will.
Right.
As I mentioned before, I golf was not something that was part of my upbringing. In fact, until I was introduced to the private club industry, I had never set foot. Matter of fact, before going to college, also I had never set foot on a golf course, and so it was a complete and total accident. I can tell you that Um, I started in the industry by washing dishes. I was a dishwasher at the age of 15 in a
Oh, wow.
restaurant.
Wow.
Um, that was not so much of an accident because I told you a little bit about how I grew up, and the reason I mentioned that was so much of what happens after that was a consequence of those circumstances. And I wasn't working at 15 because I wanted to. I was working at 15 because I had to.
Sure.
And so I was a dishwasher and had the opportunity to essentially perform every position within that restaurant
Hmm.
my teens. It was hard work, but it was very enjoyable work. And then later in my life, when I decided to pursue higher education, it became clear to me very quickly that I had to leave the restaurant industry because the schedule was not very predictable and not conducive to pursuing a college education. And
Hmm.
so I had a family friend that was working in aerospace, and I
Mm.
had an opportunity to work on an interesting project, the Tomahawk missile.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so I went from washing dishes to working on the Tomahawk missile program. So that was kind of fun. But truth be known, although that position and that particular job was interesting from the standpoint that of the project that I was working on, it was certainly important. Um, and the pay was great, the benefits were great, and it certainly provided a predictable schedule and allowed me to attend college. The thing about it that wasn't so great was, for me, it was not something that I enjoyed doing. It was
Yeah.
very static. It was very, again, predictable. It was very mundane. I was in a big facility, kind of what I call the cubicle environment. And
Sure.
given my personality and my interests and everything else, and especially having spent about 5 years working in a fast-paced, dynamic environment, interacting with people all the time, which was something that was very much aligned with my personality. I endured that work at the in aerospace only because it allowed me to pursue my education. And the
Sure.
other thing from that, which was great because it gave me clarity, was I knew exactly not only what I liked. I loved hospitality. I loved people. I loved the dynamic workplace. But more importantly, I learned what I didn't like, which was
Right.
a static environment in a cubicle kind of, if you will, sterile type environment that wasn't very dynamic. And so that that experience, those two experiences early on in life, helped me then make good decisions about other opportunities that came my way, including when I was introduced to the club business.
So I know you spent a lot of time at Hacienda Golf Club. Was that where you started in hospitality, or did you have something before then, or what was the sort of journey you had there?
Yeah, the my first exposure to hospitality was the restaurant
Right,
that I
right.
mentioned earlier, and then from that I went on to aerospace, and then left aerospace and attended college. And initially, I was working in aerospace in the morning, and then attending a community college in the evening. And once I completed my general education and received my AA, I then decided to transfer to Cal Poly Pomona. And the reason I chose Cal Poly was I went to see a counselor at the community college and shared with my counselor what I shared with you in terms of I like hospitality, I like a dynamic
Sure.
environment. I don't like the office environment. And I asked what I thought was a dumb question. I said, "Can you study like restaurants, hotels?" I didn't even know what hospitality was or what to call it.
Right, right.
And the counselor said, "Absolutely." He said, "There's hotel restaurant management. It's a bachelor's degree. One of the top 10 schools in the country is not too far from here. We have a relationship with them."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's how I learned about Cal Poly and the hospitality program there, and that was again how and why I ended up at Cal Poly Pomona. Now, how that's related to the club business was my first quarter. at Cal Poly Pomona. I was in a health and sanitation class, big auditorium type classroom. I sat next to a guy by the name of Chris Ojeda, and Chris was an outgoing guy, a nice guy, hospitality guy, and after class, Chris said, "Hey, are you new to the university?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Would you like to meet people?" I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Well, I'm the president of the student chapter at Cal Poly Pomona of the Club Managers Association of America.
Hmm.
And so if you'd like to join our club, we've got an event tonight that we're volunteering for, and you can meet me here in the parking lot at 6 p.m. and meet some folks and see if this is something you'd like to do." And at the time, kind of like my ignorance with hospitality and not knowing what that was in terms of an industry, when he said the Club Management Association, I thought he was talking about like nightclubs and things like that. I said, I'm a college student. I love a dynamic environment. I love
Sure,
hospitality.
sure.
If we're going to go volunteer at some club, I'm all in.
Yeah,
And and so I said yes. And that night I met him in the parking lot and we drove over to the Pacific Palisades and I volunteered at a club called Riviera.
yeah, right around the corner from where I'm
And
sitting. Yeah.
yeah, I remember going out where the first tee is, kind of
Yeah,
looking down the canyon, overseeing, the beautiful Pacific Palisades and looking around and said to myself, this isn't a nightclub, but this is certainly an environment that I think I could get used to. And so I met my actual lifetime mentor there, who was the president of the Southern California chapter of Club Managers Association, a person who's now retired. Many in our industry know his name's Tim Bockles. And Tim at the time was the general manager and COO of the Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club in Newport Beach, California. And I got his card and immediately reached out to him after that event and said, "I wash dishes, I can clean toilets, I can do pretty much anything and everything you need in a restaurant environment, and I'd love to learn more about clubs, and I'd love for you to give me an opportunity to work for you." And he hired me as bartender and food server. And my first quarter at Cal Poly Pomona, I went to work at the Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club. And from that day forward, that was over 30 years ago, I've only worked in private equity clubs from that moment on. My junior and senior year of college, and then every year of my professional life since.
I love the Riviera story just because, it seems fitting. You're at Hogan's Alley at Colonial, and Hogan is so associated with Riviera. There's that wonderful statue of him near the first tee. But how did the Hacienda Golf Club opportunity come about for you?
Very much like every opportunity that's come to me in my life, it's the network, friends, the people that you meet, and just being ready when the opportunities arise. And I went to work with Tim, as I mentioned earlier, and he immediately became a mentor. And as part of that mentorship, he helped me build my network, both peers of mine and peers of his. Got to meet and got to know some of the kind of icons, if you will, of the industry, senior managers who were very successful and, like so many in this industry, willing to give back and willing to teach and learn and mentor young professionals. And so I was able to build a really good network early on. And when the opportunity arose at Hacienda, I didn't apply for it. I didn't have a recruiter contact me. I had a couple of managers in the area, in the Southern California area, who had actually recommended me for the position, and they contacted me, and I had an opportunity to interview for that position at the age of 29, and was fortunate
Wow,
enough to
young, yeah.
be selected.
Awesome. And you were there for probably what, 15 years or so, I think, or 14, 15
Yeah, that's
years.
right. Just a
Um,
little shy of 15 years.
yeah, and so just kind of that was you're 29, you're in an important position there at it's a lovely club. I've been down there. what did you sort of view looking back kind of on your major accomplishments there and maybe what you kind of learned from all that time there in Hacienda that has played a role in your career subsequently?
Yeah, we all heard the term "drinking through a fire hose." That
Yeah.
that's pretty much what the first 5 years felt like there. Honestly, I was 29 years old, and I had restaurant experience. I had some club experience at that time. I had great mentors, but I wasn't ready or prepared for that position at that point in time. Again, fortunately, I had great mentors and great people I could call on that kind of helped me through those initial years when I really didn't have the knowledge or the experience at the time um, to lead that club. But the other side of that is that it was a tremendous opportunity in so many respects, including, to your question, the opportunity to learn a great deal in a very short period of time. The club was established in 1920. A very well known, prominent family in that area, the Bell family.
Yeah.
But in this industry, and pretty much anybody in the world of golf knows Bel Air Country Club. Well, Bel Air was the second golf project for the Bell family. The first was Hacienda, and then they went on to Bel Air Hotel, the Bel Air Bay Club, et cetera. So it has this great history. It was Willie Watson design,
Yeah.
1920. But like so many clubs in that era, it had depreciated significantly, and the club was operating in that perpetual kind of 12-month cycle, and just focusing on breaking even year over year, and um, some really needed some leadership and really needed a long-term plan, and they didn't have it at the time, and so we developed a strategy. We're able to change governance, and we're able to put together both a governance plan, an operational plan, and a capital plan that really transformed the club. And today it's a club that continues to do well and continues to thrive. I think, and a lot of that has to do with the changes that the club made during that time that I was fortunate enough to be a part of those changes. We completely renovated the golf course. We scraped the building and built the building, a brand new building from the ground up, including the entire site, parking lot, moved the first tee complex and green, redid the cart barn, pretty much every square inch of the
Wow.
facility
Yeah.
was addressed as part of that plan. And the most significant, I think, contribution that I made was being a part of how we changed governance and how we created a
Hmm.
structure that allowed the club to look forward and to be more strategic. And of course, most of those things came from governance. I'll give you one
Yeah, please.
uh,
Interesting.
specific
Yeah,
example, and I think it
please.
was, yeah, likely the most significant, and that was that we created a strategy around capital that allowed us to focus all of our dues and operational income around providing a great experience, but then have also a pipeline that was reliable and that could consistently provide the capital that the club needed to both maintain the asset as well as have reserves for the future. And one of the changes was we took the club from it remained an equity club, but we took away we basically made the transfer fee 100%, and so that all proceeds from the sale of membership would be available for investment. And we did that in a positive way around the concept of stewardship. Leave it better than you found it. Very simple. Everybody understood it, and by um, essentially providing the roadmap, providing the modeling as part of this strategic planning process to show the membership what the need was and what the best and most reliable way of funding that would be. it was not easy. It was controversial at times, and the conversations were not easy, but they were necessary and very important. And I think if you were to visit that club today, it's not a club with a like Colonial that has national, in fact, worldwide recognition. It's a club that's very local. I would call it a very modest club, but the conditions are amazing. The people are amazing, and it's a great club for its members and the people that are employed there. And so that one change that was part of a larger governance change, I think was absolutely critical, not only to the changes that occurred while I was there, but more importantly, which I think is a sign of a great leader, is the changes that you make that are sustainable and that continue to make an organization better after you leave.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting. So I know we have our mutual friend Henry Delosier, and who's worked with us, and we made very similar changes in building up capital from sales of memberships. And so I totally can appreciate what you're saying. I mean, that's so important. As you sort of keep track of your capital asset study and where your capital assets stand, to sort of have a reliable flow to replace that, have the reserves with an eye towards what's going to be need to be replaced. So that totally resonates with me. So you were there for, I think, all the way till fall of 2015. Then you go up north to Diablo Country Club. What sort of made what made you make that sort of change, and what appealed to you about making that move?
Yeah, that was the only move in my um, career that was very much intentional and very much part of my plan, and kind of my own uh, journey, and it was one that I had been planning for years,
Hmm.
and it had to do with two things. One, professional progression, and then the
Hmm.
other was more personal. I have four children, and my youngest like me, was born and raised in that community in Artesia, and many of the children that she attended kindergarten with, she attended middle school with, and high school with, and many of those people are lifelong friends of hers to this day. And so I knew that I wanted to have impact in another organization, preferably a bigger organization. I knew I had a lot of learning I wanted to do. I was certainly interested in learning more. I'm definitely a lifelong learner. It's one of the things I enjoy most about what I do. And but I didn't want to make that move until my daughter was had completed high school.
Sure,
And
I can
so
appreciate
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, right about the start of her senior year, I started basically having conversations with people in the industry that I knew could help. That in the next 12 months, 12 to 24 months, if the right opportunity arose, that I would be ready to make the move. After at that time it had been 13, 14 years at Hacienda. And so the opportunity arose at Diablo. And one of the things I love about golf is I love the history that goes with the game. I love the generational aspect of it. Um, I love the stories that come with that history. And so the opportunity to work for a club like Diablo that had this amazing history that was
Yeah.
even older
Right.
than Hacienda, another golden era golf course, and also in California, which at the time was also very appealing to me as well because it would allow me to stay close to my friends and family. And we had the Bell story and the Watson story at Hacienda, and we had the Smith family story and the Railroad Barons at Diablo, its connection as a sister club to Carnoustie.
Yeah.
I mean, history there, like Colonial and like Hacienda, was incredibly appealing, and so it was the right opportunity at the right time, and At the time, I planned to be there 10, 15 years, and it turned out to be just shy of about 5 years, because then I made the transition to Colonial. But it was an incredible 5 years, and a great decision to join that team.
And so, how does Colonial come about for you? Obviously, one of the great iconic clubs in America. You and I both like the history of the game. Nobody has more history than Colonial, going back to Marvin Leonard, Ben Hogan, as I mentioned before, 5 titles over the years there, Hogan's Alley. Just rich, rich history. So I can certainly see why that would be so appealing. How did that sort of come about? Were you sort of, did that just, you looking, or just curious how that came about? It's such a great, great club.
Another accident, another change that, like Cal Poly, like ending up in aerospace and all these things that have occurred in my life. All those things kind of happened by chance and circumstances at the time. As I mentioned earlier, Diablo was kind of the only one that was planned and intentional. Colonial was very much not in the cards. First of all, I'm a Californian.
Right.
I was born and raised, my entire family, my wife's family. I never ever saw myself living anywhere else. And at the time, it was when I was first approached. It was early summer of 2020, and so we all know what was going on in the world at that
Right.
time.
Right. With the
In fact,
pandemic. Yeah.
when I got the call, because I certainly wasn't looking, when I received the call about Colonial, I was sitting in my home office in Livermore, California, because the club was closed, and um, we took a couple key people, and only one of the key people actually who lived near the club was actually going to the club every day. And because I lived further away from the club, and was one of the key people, it was decided that I would work out of my home office because of the circumstances at the time. And so when I got the call, I was sitting in my home office in Livermore, and my first response was, "Wow, Colonial," because again, being a student of the history of the game, I knew what that meant, and I knew a lot about the club and the club's rich history. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. I was fully committed to Diablo, loved the people, loved the work, loved everything about it. And so, my initial response was, "I'm flattered. Thank you for thinking of me, but it's not in the cards." And so that's kind of how it started. And I was approached, by the way, by a friend, a longtime friend, also from not originally, he's actually originally from Texas, but I met him when he was in Los Angeles. You may know Kurt Reese,
Sure.
uh, club recruiter, former general manager, CEO at LA Country Club. Before that, Chevy Chase. And when I was at
Yeah.
Hacienda, and he was at LACC, we got to know each other and became good friends, and have remained friends ever since. So he's the one that made the call, and if you know him, you know that he's persistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, he convinced me to make the trip out to Fort Worth, Texas, and I did. And as part of that trip, in preparation for that trip, and at the time, it wasn't for an interview necessarily. It was more just to see it and to learn more about it. So I studied a little bit more, and the history, and particularly the story of Mr. Leonard was
Yeah.
not one I was as familiar with. And the more I read and the more I learned, the more appealing it became. And after that first trip, I became a little bit more interested. And after my second trip, I was sold, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, and let's talk about it. There's so much I want to get into a little, with your time there, but um, you know, as you were alluding to, so you take the job, and it's, we're in the teeth of the pandemic. As I understand it, I think there was already some major capital projects that were on the table. That's quite a challenging thing to step into during a pandemic. What was that like, and sort of how were you able to proceed with those projects given the challenges of the pandemic?
Yeah, it was there was quite a bit of risk in making the decision that I made at the time I made it. And frankly, in the first 30 days here, I realized that the challenge and the risk were much greater even than I initially realized. It was very challenging time, uh, to be sure, and and the club, as you mentioned, was considering major capital projects, but as is often the case, uh, the membership was divided on many of those issues. Um, the club is, as we know, a very historic club, a very traditional club, um, a club that has significant history. A matter of fact, this year's Charles Schwab Challenge, it's advanced week right now. Festivities have already begun and are underway. The tournament proper starts Thursday of next week, and we're celebrating our 80th
Right,
PGA Tour. So we
right.
are, among a lot of other historical things, the club is the longest running PGA Tour event in history at the
At the
same
same
location,
facility, right? Yeah.
at the same facility. And so, um, yeah, hosting a PGA Tour event, one that is all volunteer run, coming to a club in the middle of the pandemic, and then also a club that was divided in terms of what the future would look like, including with the PGA Tour, and how to approach those projects and how to fund those projects. Um, those were significant challenges, all occurring concurrently. And I'm arriving after a transition that occurred about 12 months before I arrived in this position. So the position basically was vacant for nearly 12 months.
Oh,
So
wow.
as you might
Wow.
imagine, the challenge was monumental.
Yeah, so how did you sort of deal with all that? I mean, you obviously moved forward. I know, you did a bunch of projects, and I'm trying to remember the sequencing of them, but certainly one of them was the golf course restoration. And you've got obviously a gem of a historic golden age course. You're working with one probably the best in the business at that with Gil Hanse. But hosting the tournament every year, I mean, that's a tight timeline, right? Getting it all done between the tournaments. I mean, maybe let's start with that, the golf course stuff. I mean, what was that like? I mean, how were you able to sort of, get the members behind it and then get it executed on that tight timeline?
Yeah, that there's a lot to address there. There's a lot
Yeah,
to
I
address
appreciate that.
back
Take it
there.
any way you want.
Yeah, yeah. Let me start kind of big picture.
Sure,
I'll
please.
give you a couple of
Yeah.
great quotes uh, that I really like and that have been very instructive. One is Sir Winston Churchill. The further back you see, the further forward you see.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, or excuse me, the further back you look, the further forward you see.
Or
I
do you
think I
see?
got
Right. Yeah.
that's number one, and the other one is Albert Einstein.
Mm.
That if I had an hour to solve a very difficult, challenging problem, I'd spend the first 55 minutes asking the right questions.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And
Those are
so
great quotes.
they're great quotes, and as I say, they're very, very relevant, and we're very much a part of how we approached that challenge that I articulated earlier. Looking back was, who are we? Um, what is Colonial Country Club? What was its purpose? What was Mr. Leonard's purpose when he founded this club? Um, so we went back and looked at the club's history as a way to help us define the future. And it helped us tremendously in terms of not only the things to do, but also in terms of aligning the membership around the big picture principles. Because you can't start with, whether the building is going to be knocked down or renovated, or whether the golf course is going to be completely changed, or we're just going to address the infrastructure and all those kinds of things. When you start with the little stuff, you can never you never get anywhere. You basically just spin your wheels and just
Right.
argue, and then basically you end up a club or an organization divided. And as I mentioned earlier, that's what they had done before,
Right.
and that's where they ended up. And so we had to take a step back and revisit who we are, and that was so instructive. And that's why that Sir Winston Churchill quote is so apropos here. In terms of asking the right questions, again, a project of the magnitude that we undertook, which by the way was it's still underway. We're about 70% through it, but it exceeds $100 million of capital investment,
That's a
and
lot. Yeah.
it's about 5 years of just construction. And so
Wow.
to give you
5 years.
an idea,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, to give you an idea of the magnitude, and for a club like Colonial that had never assessed its members and that had never taken on something of that magnitude, um, it was absolutely um, important and vital that we aligned all the constituents, the staff, board and leadership, and the membership around this plan. And so, again, in terms of the quote, we had to engage the membership and ask the right questions. And once we had the clarity from our history and the clarity from our membership, then those two things informed our plan for the future. And getting, again, those different constituencies aligned around that future wasn't easy, but certainly became achievable. And to give you an example of the alignment, we were before 5 or 6 years engaged with Gil Hands, and again
Mm-hmm.
spinning our wheels, but no progress
Mm-hmm.
for about 6 years prior to starting this process and prior to my arrival. And in less than 12 months, we voted on the golf course project and had approximately, if I remember correctly, it was 84 or 83% approval
Wow. That's
on that
impressive.
project. Yeah, and that project, by the way, was a $25 million project that required a golf course closure. So no access to the golf course for an entire year. And also the risk was that we had a contract with our title sponsor and a contract with the PGA Tour that required us to hold a tournament. And that tournament comes around every year for 80 years now. And so we had not only a deadline, it was a hard deadline. There was no
Right.
flexibility, no
Right.
plan B. And we had 12 months to complete that project, and it was really more of a 14 to 16-month project. And this is in Fort Worth, Texas, where weather is very unpredictable and can be
Sure.
very severe. And so there's several interviews with Gil Hands, and Gil Hands will tell you that one of the only things that ever kept him up at night was the Colonial project, because of the risk associated with that 12-month window and the extensive scope of this project. And so we when the decision was made and it was approved and we had our start date, we basically brought the bulldozers in as the final putt dropped at the PGA Tour event, the Charles Schwab Challenge, and the first group to tee off a year later was at the Charles Schwab Challenge.
Wow. Amazing. And so was it I mean, how extensive was it? I mean, did it pretty much redo most of the course, or what was involved in it? I mean, that's a lot to get done in a year.
Yeah, it was every square inch of the facility, everything from restrooms and comfort stations to cart paths, drainage ways, Of course, all the infrastructure associated with the golf course, greens,
Right. All the
fairways,
irrigation, all the greens. Yeah.
yeah, everything
Yeah.
underneath, drainage, irrigation, every square inch of the golf course was part of the renovation. Also installed, it was extensive, not just in that regard in terms of the scope, but also installing hydronic units for both cooling and heating of the greens. That was also part of the project.
Oh,
So that
wow.
adds
That's a big,
complexity.
yes. Yeah.
It adds complexity. It adds cost. It adds time. And as you know, on any project, but especially a golf course project, things have to happen in a certain sequence,
Right.
and there's a critical path. And so this added another layer of complexity to that critical path, as well as adding to the overall schedule. So it was as extensive as an 18-hole golf course renovation can be.
Wow. Well, let me ask you about another area, and I know I've seen you talk about this, write about this, and that's F&B. And it sounds like you've sort of, you know, also focused on that and, kind of trying to respond to, the changing member demographics that all of our clubs are sort of experiencing. And really interested in kind of your thoughts on that and kind of how you approach that and what you've done at Colonial on F&B and why, and just kind of your thinking on that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, one of my philosophies is that in so many cases, including the kind of the food and beverage conversation in clubs, particularly clubs like Colonial and Diablo and Hacienda for that matter, where there's a golf centric dynamic or tradition at the club. Often, when in that environment, when you approach other topics, other amenities, whether it be wellness or food and beverage or anything else, people tend to think of those things as instead of. I like to think of those things as in addition to. They're
Hmm.
complementary and they're equally important. And one of the things I'm a big believer in is data. And one of the things we know by studying these things in other industries, including clubs. As a matter of fact, it was a great white paper just published not too long ago by Club Benchmarking. And they highlight some regression analysis that they did around member satisfaction. And one of the things they discovered, which has been studied in other areas, but one of the things they discovered was that in clubs, food and beverage, among all the amenities that we provide in our industry, is the number one factor in member satisfaction. As you know, with regression analysis, it's isolating the impact of specific variables. And
Right.
so golf falls a couple of notches below that. And there's a couple of kind of governance and trust things that are above that. But among amenities, food and beverage is the most important. And so, from a data perspective, that's kind of where you start. Food and beverage is the most important amenity. The second thing is looking back, as I mentioned before, the further forward you see, right? And so when I look back, I was inspired by so many things that Mr. Leonard did. He was an incredible visionary, an incredible businessman, and the principles that we applied in our strategic plan, so much of that was not original. None of that was my idea. All I did, frankly, was study Leonard
Hmm.
and take the best of what he did in
Mm.
creating Colonial Country Club and its history, his iconic business here in Fort Worth, the Leonard's department store, and so many other things he did in philanthropies and in other areas of his life. And one of the things he knew as a businessman was that it's not good enough to be better than the competition. He believed that you must be both better and different. So this, what we hear in business parlance as differentiation, and there's been so much written about that. He
Right.
used different words to get there, but he was way, like so many things, he was way ahead of his time. And so one of the principles we applied here and everything that we did was that principle of not only being better, but being different. So I'll give you an example in golf of where that made a huge difference. One of the big
Yeah.
controversies that divided the club on the golf course project was we're in Texas, and historically we had bent grass greens, and Mr. Leonard put in bent grass greens because of the principle. He knew that if he wanted to bring a major golf event to the South and to Fort Worth specifically, that he needed to be both better and different. So nobody in this region had bent grass greens. He knew it was a
Right.
superior surface because of his travels, and so he took the risk and planted bent grass greens here. And he was able to attract the 1941 U.S. Open as a result, and the rest is
Yeah.
history. That
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
very intentional, very strategic thing.
Right.
Again, incredible visionary. And so the big debate was, as part of this renovation, bent grass or Bermuda. We called it the Bermuda Wars, because literally they were fighting over what we should do. But again, when we look back and we explained how that was not only a Leonard decision, we explained why Leonard did it and why it was such an important part of our history and why it should be such an important part of everything we do going forward, including our strategy. It became a non-issue. It was a no-brainer, if you will, at that point. Let's go with bent grass greens. And so, how does that apply to what we did in food and beverage? Well, rather than just renovating the restaurants that we have in our main clubhouse, we had an old building to the north that was connected that served no real purpose. And so we said to ourselves, how do we honor that legacy of Mr. Leonard? How do we do something in food and beverage that's both better and different? And so we built a 35,000 square foot, 3-story building to the north of our main clubhouse, and built 2 restaurant concepts in that building. That building was a $45 million project that opened in December of last year. And we made, I mean, if you look at just the dollars, you can see how important it was to us. We made it a priority to make sure that the quality of everything we did, including food and beverage, was commensurate with that legacy.
So were there different, I mean, was it more casual or what were you, what were you doing on F&B to try to make it appealing to the membership you have today in those facilities?
Well, so many clubhouses, especially the older clubhouses in our industry, they didn't build what anybody in the restaurant industry would consider a restaurant. They basically would have a room, they would put tables and chairs in it and build a bar somewhere, and then take a space that was probably 4 times smaller than it needed to be and put a bunch of kitchen equipment in it and called it a restaurant.
Right.
And so many, and I'm sure you've walked into a lot of clubs and seen that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of people listening to this podcast or in the industry can appreciate that.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and that's more or less what we had here. And so the ability to build something anew, and we went out again. These were all intentional decisions around these bigger principles, because when you get the big principles right, everything else kind of falls in place. And so we hired an architect that had built clubhouses, but we hired a design firm that had extensive restaurant experience, and we didn't build a clubhouse with rooms and tables and chairs, etc. We actually built restaurants.
Yeah.
And so everything that we did in that building is what any restaurateur would do if they were building those restaurant concepts. And so that was the big difference, was we actually built restaurants. And so everything from operations to efficiencies to experience to the flexibility and the experience we can provide for our members is reflective of those decisions.
And the reaction, I assume, has been pretty positive, it sounds like. I know it hasn't been open that long, but
Yeah, we're we, again, data, so we measure, and we have member insights, which is a survey tool that we use on a daily basis in every outlet, including food and beverage. And then in the restaurants, we use member insights and we use Open Table.
Yeah.
And so we get real-time data all the time, and we've been averaging above 4.5 on a 5-point scale
Wow.
since opening those restaurants. And the only challenge we've had is the demand. Even though we built a larger footprint, the demand often exceeds our capacity.
Wow, that's a good thing to have. And yeah, I totally agree with you about data. I know you mentioned club benchmarking. We work with them as well. I actually had Ray Cronin on the podcast a while back. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the data is so critically important for making decisions. So I'm totally with you on that. One other thing I just wanted to ask you, just specific to Colonial, and then I'll get you out of here on sort of a more general best practices question. But just because the tournament is, as you say, it's already, it's coming up here the next week. I mean, I assume, I mean, that's a lot to give up your course every year for the PGA Tour. But there's such a history there. I assume your members are super supportive of that. But I'm just sort of curious from your standpoint, running the club, what's it like having the tour come to town every year?
It's amazing. I had the opportunity early on to work for the International. Had the opportunity to lead VIP services for the International at Castle Pines several years
Oh, yeah,
ago.
in
That's
Colorado, that was a wonderful event. Yeah, right.
yeah, that was early on in my career, and a tremendous amount of fun doing that. Learned a lot, met a lot of great people, and really enjoyed it. And after about 3 years of doing that, shortly thereafter, I was hired by Hacienda, and so I didn't have the opportunity to do that any longer. And until coming to Colonial, I hadn't worked on a PGA Tour event since then, and so incredibly exciting, incredibly rewarding to come back here and get an opportunity to do that. This is going to be my fifth, as we call it here, the Colonial. It's known now as the
Right.
Charles Schwab.
I do too. I mean,
Yeah, most people here in Fort Worth refer to it as the Colonial because it used to be it's the only tour event that is truly run by the members, and it's kind of always been that way.
wow.
For most of most of that 80 years, there were no there was no tournament office, there were no tournament professionals in operations or otherwise. It was supported by the club staff, but the tournament itself was operated entirely by volunteers, the members, and then volunteers from the community as well. So it's part of our history, it's part of our heritage, and it's something our members are very proud of. And I think that history helps alleviate some of the concerns around the disruption and other things that certainly are challenging for any club when you basically give up your facility for 2 or 3 weeks a year, every year for 80 years. It can be disruptive. But I'll share something with you that's interesting. I
Yeah.
think it's something that, again, people in the industry will appreciate, and that is when I arrived, there was a lot of conversation as part of, again, the future and what kinds of changes we would make as part of this strategy and this strategic plan that we were working on. And controversy, part of the controversy or part of the conversation was what does the future look like with the PGA Tour and major championships? Because there's other things that we do, not just the PGA Tour event, and anecdotally, much of what I heard through the committee process and just talking to members, getting to know the club, and getting to know the people was that this was in fact a controversy and kind of similar to the golf course project. The membership was divided.
Hmm.
That's what I was led to believe, and anecdotally, it seemed to kind of support that this was an issue that was dividing the membership. But as part of the strategic planning process, we did extensive focus groups as well as the comprehensive survey. We did both the satisfaction survey and separately we did a strategic survey. And what we learned was that the vast majority of the members of the club saw value in our in the PGA Tour event and wholeheartedly supported it. And so, like so many issues, the 90% of what we were hearing was coming from 10% of the membership. It
Yeah,
was
totally. Yeah.
the vocal minority. But again,
Yes.
when you rely on anecdotal information, when you um, don't rely on data, you can quickly come to the wrong decisions, and you can leave, opportunities pass you by in some cases. In other cases, you make bad decisions that have consequences that can be very severe. And we could have, if we had listened to the anecdotal information, um, things could have been very different for Colonial and for our involvement in championship golf.
Yeah, that's
So
a
I
great
guess,
point. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
great
to bring
point.
it home, the club is very supportive of the event, and the membership is very supportive of the event. Everybody here at Colonial, and for that matter, everybody here in the DFW market looks forward to this event. It's very much a kind of a Fort Worth DFW event. We get approximately 1,500 volunteers.
Wow.
We have volunteers that have been serving here for 50 and 60 years. We have volunteers that have moved out of the area and fly in to volunteer for the
Wow,
tournament.
that's impressive. Yeah.
Very much a labor of love for our employees, for our members, and for our community.
Awesome. Well, listen, I'll get you here on out of here on this, and we probably touched on some of this, but just maybe to sum it up. I mean, you've, had such a long, successful career in the industry, and you're a very thoughtful guy. I mean, what would you sort of say that you view as sort of what you see as the best practices for successful clubs, and if you were just giving advice to some of the best practices for successful clubs, and the pitfalls that clubs need to be mindful of.
Yeah, no, that's a great question to end on. Um, I would say in terms of pitfalls, I think the thing that hurts our industry the most is the lack of continuity in leadership. Many in our industry know that the average tenure of a COO general manager is less than 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
That is short. Yeah.
and a lot of that has to do with the structure in clubs in terms of governance. Um, the volunteer leadership component is very transitory, has a very transitory nature. And to me, it is a fundamental kind of foundational structural flaw of our industry that's been a part of our industry for over a century, and it's one of the few things that has not evolved. And much of what I've written, and anytime I have an opportunity to talk about this issue with club leaders, peers, members of other clubs, leaders at clubs, I always mention this because again, I think it's a fundamental flaw in our industry, and you can see it in manifest itself in many challenges, including what I mentioned about the tenure of a leader in our industry. Um, if you think about it, strategy by definition is 3 to 5 years, and most strategic plans um, are 3 to 5 years long. And if your manager's tenure is shorter than your strategic plan, the likelihood of having long-term sustainable success with strategy is very unlikely. And
Sure.
again, you can have a great strategy, you can have great leadership and great commitment from all constituents and still fail because of the structural flaw. When you're changing your strategy and you're changing your leadership every 3 years, long-term success is not possible. It's
Yeah.
unachievable.
Yeah.
It's unachievable. So as pitfalls go, that's one change that I think could be made in our industry that kind of what I mentioned earlier in terms of, when you make a difference and when you have impact, impact that exists over time, that exists longer than the person who made that change and continues to benefit others even after that person is no longer in the industry or no longer on this earth. Those are the kinds of changes that are truly impactful. That's what you call
Right.
transformational change.
Right.
And when people say, why does the general manager, you know, transition every 3 years? There's a million different things that people talk about. Well, those are not the reasons. Those are the consequences, or those are kind of the symptoms of the disease, if you will, of the bigger problem. The
Yeah.
problem is the problem is lack of continuity. That's what we need to fix. And
Yeah.
so, kind of along those same lines, when you talk about, what are the best practices for success, if you can, we all know the clubs that have success, right? And they're very, very unique and very, very different. You think about a Congressional versus San Francisco Golf Club. You think of Cypress versus a Riviera. You think of a club like Medina, a club like Colonial. You just go down Shinnecock, right? Augusta. If we were to line every one of those clubs up that I just mentioned, those clubs are very unique and very, very different.
Yeah.
Yet, all iconic. They've all had sustained success, and they're all well known and renowned and revered around around the world. What do they all have in common? They all know who they are.
Yeah.
There is absolute clarity and alignment around purpose, mission, and vision. They know who they are. So if you look at clubs that are successful versus clubs that are average or clubs that are failing, to me, that is the big difference. Again, you can look at 1,000 different reasons why a club that's not thriving or a club that's failing is failing or not thriving. But if you look at what are the fundamental differences, and this is, over a 30-year career and listening and asking the right questions to people that have been doing it even longer than I have, if I had to point to one thing, because it usually is one really important thing, not 1,000 unimportant things. What is the true difference? Is they know who they are. When
Yeah.
there is alignment across all the constituents, board, leadership, professional staff, and the membership, when you have a defined, certain target and absolute clarity is not only where the dartboard is, but where is that bullseye,
Yeah.
the likelihood of hitting it and having long-term sustained success goes way up, right? We all have heard the saying that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Or back to my original first job in a club, which was at a yacht club that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
I think the thing there was if you don't know where you're going, no wind is favorable. And they
I
all mean
like
the
that.
same thing. I mean, I've often told boards that if you put me in front of a dartboard and you ask me to hit the bullseye, to use my analogy from earlier, but you blindfold me and you turn me in circles 20 times and ask me to hit the bullseye, the likelihood of me hitting it and hitting it often or getting close to it every time I try is almost, I'm not going to hit my target. I'm going to miss every time. You're setting me up for failure. However, if you put the dartboard out there and it's fixed, and I know exactly where the bullseye is, and I keep trying to hit it, I'm going to get really close, and eventually I'm going to hit it. And when everybody is pointing in the same direction, and everybody knows exactly where they're going, the likelihood of getting there in a straight line goes way up. And so for me, again, best practice, know who you are, be aligned around who you are and what your purpose is, and the likelihood of not only being successful, but being successful long-term goes way up.
Well said. That makes perfect sense. And you certainly have that at Colonial. And Frank, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, particularly on the eve of the tournament. I know you're busy with that, but thank you so much and good luck with everything with the tournament. It is one of the great events on the PGA Tour, and congratulations on the 80th anniversary, and good luck with it. And again, thank you so much for making time to talk with us today.
Yeah, no, it's a privilege to be a part of Colonial and their tournament history, and I certainly enjoyed the conversation with you today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.